everyone. Thank you for joining me for another monthly wrap up of what we read. I am Voodoo Pickles and I hope you guys are having an amazing day. So this month was the month of the audiobook. I feel this is the first month since we started keeping track that we read through audiobooks more than we did digital or physical books, and I enjoyed the audiobooks. It was a weird time at work. I was working more hours and I found out about Warframe. Do you guys know about Warframe? Warframe is fantastic. I'm annoyed with it right now because I have to go fishing on Deimos and trying to do those bounties, and that's a whole thing. That's a whole thing. I'm trying to get in favor with that faction. I'm just like... So I'm annoyed with it right now, but I found out about Warframe, and that's just where a lot of my free time went. If you guys want to be my friends on Warframe, you can look me up at Voodoo Pickles. But the first book we read this month was Jellyfish Age Backwards, Nature's Secret to Longevity, and it is by Nicholas Brenborg. And it was an audiobook. It was about approximately 7 hours. It was a nonfiction book, and I really need to stop listening to nonfiction books, and this is the last one I think I'm going to do it with. I wrote a lot of little scribbles down while I was listening to it when I was able to, because like I said, I listen to audiobooks at work, so when I was able to listen to it and stop and like scribble something down, but having a non-fiction book physically, I'll be able to actually take notes on it, annotate it a little bit, be like, oh, yep, that's smart, or that's interesting, or I want to know more about this. But this book, when I look at it now, I realize that it is as advertised, like, okay, but there was a jellyfish on the front. There was a jellyfish in the name. When I started listening to it, it started talking about different types of animal species and the way that they could age backwards or the way that their cells heal themselves. So I thought it was a book on animals, which I am highly fascinated with. Like, some jellyfish species indeed do age backwards. Yes, tell me more about that. That is fascinating. I would love to hear about that. Oh, wait, you're just using these as comparisons to how humans age and how humans are looking for ways to lengthen their lives. Like, oh, I don't care about that. It was fascinating information. Like, nonetheless, it was very fascinating information, and I did get some notes down. So when I'm able to like look over it more and then try and fill in the gaps, I'll be able to speak on it coherently. I was really annoyed that it wasn't about animals more, and I really wanted an animal book, and it was not an animal book, but it was a pretty good book if you're interested in the science part of it and how they go into cell structures and to how different species age in comparison to humans, and then the humans' backstory, and there's humor in it, then it's definitely something I would pick up. Again, I just didn't care as much about the subject matter. I cared like half of it. Half of it was like animal stuff, and I was like, yes, I need more of this. And the other half was about humans and stuff, and I was like, oh, not really interested in that, but okay. So I gave it a 3 out of 5. It's not something I'll read again. It just makes me really want to go find a book about animals. So I am still looking for that, but it'll have to be physically because I cannot do nonfiction on audio anymore because it just comes in one ear and goes out the other when I'm trying to think about exactly what I listen to. But the second book we read this month was My Darling Dreadful Thing, and this is by Johanna von Veen, and it is an audiobook, and it's about approximately 10 hours, and this one threw me for a loop. It's the same thing with the Divolia book that we read a couple of months ago. I picked it based on the cover of it, and it was labeled as a horror, like maybe a thriller. I was like, okay, yeah. It looks very horror-ish. I was not ready for the things because again, I don't read the little blurbs about what they are. I pick library books based just on vibes. Just on vibes. I'm like, they're library books. I'm just gonna pick it on vibes. And My Darling Dreadful Thing, like, hit me in the feels on a lot of these things, and it was so good. I really enjoyed it. I don't know what it says on the back of the book, but I am definitely not going to leave any spoilers about what this book is. I will tell you, though, it is a very good example of how people can react based on their environment and how they personally see things. It threw me as for a trip. The twist at the end, I did not see coming. Like, I figured a little bit, but I figured, like, okay, these things are like this, but it's all like in their heads. They're not actually going to do this. And then, oh, they did the thing. They did the thing. And then these are the consequences of the things. And okay. And it threw a whole different loop on, I can't read of like it, ghosts. It's a lot about ghosts and how ghosts are made. And it was a different explaining of how ghosts are made than what I usually hear in any type of media, which was very fascinating. But definitely, if you're willing to pick it up, check out the trigger warnings. The trigger warnings are going to be key. There's a lot of things in this book that I was just like, wow. There was some stuff about some eating things that are going on and some recuperating from physical, mental, and emotional abuse that happened a lot in this book that I was just like, wow. And then there was also some assaults that happen in this book, which I wasn't ready for. It hinted around at it, but I didn't know this was the thing that happened until it told you explicitly what had happened. But in a way that it explicitly told you without using explicit and graphic language. So definitely check out the trigger warnings. I enjoyed this book. I think it's something that I would also prefer to read again. When I read it again, I would like to read it physically or digitally so I can absorb the words in those ways and take my time with it versus an audiobook. Like, the pacing of the narrator for the audiobook worked really well. And it was like watching a horror movie to where the pacing of it it builds and builds and builds, and then the thing happens, and then it crashes, and then it builds up, and then it crashes, and I'm like, this is so good. This is so good. And I really enjoyed it. I rated it a 4 out of 5. And I think it'll be one that I will, maybe in a few years from now, when I've completely forgotten what it is, I will find either a physical copy or a digital copy, pick it up again, and just be hopefully thrown through this whirlwind of emotions that I was thrown into. And I really enjoyed it. Like I said, 4 out of 5. The third book we read this month was The Happy Housekeeper's Guide to Homicide. And this was written by Blythe Baker, and it's an audiobook that's approximately 4 hours. And it is the beginning of a series of books. I would assume murder mystery novels. So I picked this one up because, one, the title. I mean, that's just it's a cute title. The second one, it looked like, 1950s American housewife. And I was like, yeah, I can see a 1950s American housewife doing murder. Like, and then trying to get away with said murder, like, depending on the craftiness of the housewife, like, yeah, it could be pretty interesting. I'd probably be funny. Like, and the person on it looked like Lucy from I Love Lucy. So I was like, yeah, dark subject matter, but funny. Kind of reminded me of like Pushing Daisies vibes. So I was really excited about it. I went to pick it up. It is not that at all. So there is murder in it. It is a murder mystery novel, but our main character is not a housewife. She is a housekeeper. So I keep thinking housewife when I see housekeeper in it, but no, she's the sister of the sheriff that of this small town that she moves to because she's running away from something. And trying to think of what I can say. Yeah, she came from a big city, went to a small town, and then she's there trying to adjust, and then boom, there's a murder. And the murder happens, and she is dealing with that. And it was a little frustrating with some of the characters. I was just like, why would you do this? Why would you do this? Based on the character that I was presented above this, plus your profession. Why? Why would you do this? And then other characters that were being berated in the book for their actions, I was like, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Why are you trying to call them out on this? This is logical. Like, this is how things would work in this situation. So it was, I don't know if I'll go back to the series. Maybe if I read it in a thing and not listen to the voice I had in my head with the narrator. The narrator did a great job with the narration of the main character's POV. Absolutely great, except it was annoying. She was perfect for it, but I'm like, this is the type of woman that would just drive me crazy. Like, drive me crazy. And so if I read it in my voice, in my head, I would assume that I would like it better. I don't know, but maybe I'll go back to it. I don't know how many books there are in these. I think like 7. And I think it's just centering around this one main character, which is interesting. And I'm like, what are you hiding from? What are you hiding? You're dropping hints throughout this book, but they don't tell you through the book. So maybe I'll read the second one and it'll be in that one. And that'll be an interesting thing. Oh, who knows? We'll see. Eventually, maybe. I don't know. Sorta, kind of. I don't know. I have a lot on my TBR right now, and I just started 2 other books today, so eventually. But I gave it a 3 out of 5. Like, it wasn't a bad book. I just wasn't as invested into it, and I got annoyed with some of the characters. I think that's what it was. I just got annoyed with some of the characters, and I'm like, do I want to continue a series where I don't like these characters? It's like, on one hand, no, why would I do that to myself? If I don't like the characters, why the piss should I care what they're going through? On the other hand, I'm like, if something bad happens, like karmically to you in this book, I think it would be very satisfying for me to read. Like, as a reader, when you have that character that's annoying or the villain and they just get their comeuppance and you just get that little relief in you, and you're just like, yes, justice. And so I'm like, maybe? I don't know. So it's kind of there, 3 out of 5, right in the middle. It was okay. And the 4th book we read this month was Perfume, The Story of a Murderer. And this was written by Patrick Susskind. And I read this digitally on my tablet. And I picked up this is another book. And I say this a lot with a lot of these horror books. Is I did not know that one of my favorite movies, Perfume, The Story of a Murderer, was based on this book. No idea. And I watched that movie so much. Like, when I was a lot younger, I used to have it on DVD. I lent it out to somebody and they never gave it back. And so it is gone, lost forever. But I had that on DVD and it was so fascinating to me. This book was published so long ago. I don't remember when. I thought I wrote it down, but I did not. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's a great movie and follows the book fairly closely. It condenses a lot of the parts in the book down a lot, which is crazy because this book digitally was only 272 pages. The movie, I think, is like 2 hours. But even the movie condenses things that's a whole chapter in the book, down to these little like blurb type of thing. And what, if you don't know what the story is we're following Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, and he is back in before the French Revolution times of France. And if you haven't seen it, if you haven't read it, I don't want to give away what it is, but I can tell you that he has the best nose like in the world. It's his point of view, it's his story based on how he sees the world. And he sees the world not really through his eyes, but through his nose. Like, he learns how to talk and everything by identifying smells and then trying to put sound to those smells. And that, based on the people talking around him, it tells like those words come in. And it was so fascinating. There is a lot of murder in this book. There's a lot of murder in it. But it is such a good book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of the books that I will get physically, and so I can have it in my library and reread it when I feel like rereading it, probably just as much as I used to watch the movie. I really enjoyed it. It was written a while back, and one of the things that I don't like about it is the words run on a lot. It is a very descriptive book. It is, like I said, only 272 pages, but it is condensed down all this information and all of these things. Like, I would read, and then I was like, wait, what happened? Not because I was not paying attention. It was just because there was so much information coming in at some points in time that I'd have to go back and reread a page or a paragraph and be like, okay, now I really grasp what you're saying. But the whole ending of it and everything, it follows, like I said, the movie follows it pretty well. But it's so much more in the book, and you got to feel the feelings a lot more and a lot sharply in the book than you could have with the movie. It was just because the descriptions just help that much more. And the book covers his whole life. And it was just, there was like so many years that one situation was going on. And I was just like, can't believe that's that many years. Like, it makes sense within the context, but I really enjoyed it. And I gave this a 4 out of 5. Like, it was a good book. And like I said, I was one of the books I would enjoy to get physically and have it in my library. And that'll eventually happen down the road. And the 5th book we read this month was The Exorcist, and written by William Peter Blatty. And we got the 40th anniversary edition of this book. This book is about 385 pages. I read it physically. And if you guys don't know the Exorcist story, again, I'm not going to do spoilers on it, but it was just, the book gives so much background information that it was very enlightening on what was going on, and how every specific behavior had a background on why it was happening and when you can look forward to it. If you guys don't know what The Exorcist book or movie is about, it is about a young girl, Regan, who gets possessed by a demon, and how her mother copes with that and also finds her help. And the whole part of it is that priests come and there's going to be an exorcism. And it's, trying to think of the best words to say it without giving too much away. If you guys haven't watched it, I haven't watched the movie in so long, which is funny because we were talking about this. A lot of people we know don't rewatch like the original Exorcist very often. And I thought that was an interesting thing that was happening. Like, a lot of people have seen it, but haven't, like, it's not one of those go-to, I'm gonna watch again horror movies. And I watched it a long time ago. And the book is, like I said, it's way more detailed, and it gives you a lot of background information on the characters, on the rituals, on the symptoms and everything. And they really did try to do everything for this child. Like, I was surprised as I was going through reading all of these procedures and doctors and all of these things that were going on, just because they wanted to just save this little girl. And it was shocking. And some of these things after the possession happens. So if you are going to read it, it is way more graphic than the movie. I would definitely check out the trigger warnings for that. There was some of the things where they were like implied in the movie, but the book specifically says the thing is happening. Kind of like with my Darling Dreadful thing, where it just kind of hits you out of nowhere. Like, you know where the things are happening, but this one was just very much just telling you in your face what happened. And I was not prepared for it. I was shocked by it. And I was just like, wow, this is really graphic. This made me feel really uncomfortable reading these parts of the book. So definitely check out those trigger warnings. I rated it a 4.25 out of 5 because Storygraph lets me do quarters, which is great. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was a really good book, and I'm really happy I read it and got that extra information based on like what I already had known. And the events in the book are also like based on true events, where obviously things were changed. But if you guys don't know that story, I definitely suggest you guys look up some background information, because that's fascinating too. And yeah, a 4.25 out of 5. And the 6th book we read this month was The Lion Women of Tehran. And this was written by Marjan Kamali. And the audio, I listened to it through audiobook, so it was approximately 10 hours. And this was interesting. This book covers decades. It starts in the 1950s and it ends in the 2022. Yeah, 2022. So it covers this whole span of decades, focusing around these two friends, these two women who were born and raised in Iran. And it goes over all of the political issues that were starting back then, like the riots that happened in the 70s and the change of power from the Shah to a religious leader that happened in the late 70s, early 80s, around that time frame. And then how these two women's lives changed so drastically. You had one friend who was very wealthy and came from a very wealthy family and has a mother who's very overbearing and the way she's described in this book is you're just like, wow, she's so mean, or like she's so classist, I guess would be a way to say it. And then you have another girl, Homa, who was born like in the poor part of town. She always grew up poor. And then how those different backgrounds, because they were both brought to the same neighborhood, because the girl Ellie, who came from a rich background, became poor. Like, this happened in the first few pages. It's not spoilery. Became poor, and then that's when she met her friend, and how they became friends as children, how and when they grew apart, and when they came back together, all throughout their lives. And it was fascinating on how that happened. There was a lot of it was really slow book. Like, I got a lot of background information on what was going on, and like a POV of events that would later on in the book you're like, oh, okay, I understand why I needed to know that information. But at the time I was just like, why are you showing me this? This obviously has no relevance, and this is so slow. Like, this is, like, I feel like you start off at the beginning in the 80s, and then you go back to the 50s at the end of that chapter, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna get background information. And it was slow going through the chapters to try and get to anything that I felt was relevant. But looking back on it, it was all relevant. It was all relevant. Like, all of these things made sense in the end. But at the time, I was just like, this is a slog to get through. This book took me a lot longer to get through, even though it was an audiobook. And it took me, I think, like a week to get through, just because of how slow the chapters were going. But other than that, the overarching story was, like, once you look at it from like a top-down view, it was just fascinating and great. And I didn't care for the ending as much. I understand why the ending ended the way it did, but at the same time, I'm like, I feel like this is a cop-out. I feel like you cheated me out of something that could have been even better, but I can't really say how. But I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5. It wasn't a terrible book. Like I said, the messaging was great in it. The whole story was great. The way that they both had to navigate Iran and from going from the 50s to the 2020s was just, it was fantastic. And not bad. Not something that I'll probably pick up again. Like, I don't think so, but who knows? And the 7th book we read this month was Go Ask Alice. So this is, I don't know if it's true or not, but on the book, because I have this one physically, and it was about 214 pages. Physically, it says it's anonymous, and it is a real diary of a teenager in the 70s who gets addicted to drugs. And then her story on how she became addicted to drugs, how that affected her life, and like, it was a diary that she kept throughout all of this time. And it was really interesting to read. And it was very descriptive of a lot of things, and it shows how crazy things can unwind and just go haywire so fast. And a lot of this, I kept having to remind myself how old this girl was. Like, I was going through and I was reading it, and I was just like, wow, these are issues or things that you would think that would happen to somebody a little bit older. And then you're like, oh, wait, no, she's still like 15 going through all of this. And it's just a diary explaining her point of view. On Storygraph, it says it's by somebody else. And it says it's fiction, but at the beginning, it's like, this is not fiction. This is a diary from an actual person who got addicted to drugs. So I don't know which one is true. I will eventually look into it when I go through more in depth with a review with it. But it was a really good read. There was some times in it where if I was going to look at it like a novel, like a book, to where I would be like, okay, these are the problems I have with it. But if it's an actual diary, then it makes complete sense on why it was written and formatted the way it was. Names have been changed and like blacked out. It's like Mrs. and then it'd be like blank. So I think it was a really interesting read. The descriptions of things were really fantastic in it. But it was just, I can't explain why I had some problems with it without spoiling like major plot points in the book or major events that happened in this diary. I gave it a 3 out of 5. And I will explain more in a later video on why I did, but it was still a really good read, and I'm really glad that I read it and I enjoyed it. And this one is also like considered more kind of like YA or new adult, and I can see why. Especially, it's a teenager's perspective, and I really think that I can't say things without being all spoilery. That'll be in a later video. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I'll talk about it in a later video. And that brings us to the last book reread in August, and this is Only You Can Save Mankind. And this was written by Terry Pratchett, and I read it through an audiobook, and it was approximately 4 hours, and this one is a true YA book. And Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite authors. The Discworld series is one of my absolute favorite series. It's one of the very first fantasy series. It's labeled as like sci-fi fantasy, which I completely understandable, but I thought of it as just like a fantasy series, and I really enjoyed it. And I've been reading Terry Pratchett novels since I want to say like 13, like 12, 13-ish, around that time. And especially the Discworld series especially. And for so long, I read the Discworld series that I forgot Terry Pratchett wrote other things outside of that series. And so after Go Ask Alice and The Woman of Tehran and The Exorcist and more of these heavy books, I was like, you know what? We need a palate cleanser here. We need something that's not heavy or dark or just really emotional. Like I just want to laugh. I just want to laugh. And when I want to laugh and have a good time in a book, Terry Pratchett is my go-to. And this one we got through an audiobook. I got it through my library, and it's one I haven't read before, and I don't think I've ever seen before. So it was definitely one that I was like, yeah, you know what? Let's try it. It's a shorter book. It'll be fine. Nice little palate cleanser. And it was pretty great. It was funny. It was really funny. The story follows Johnny, who is a 12-year-old over in the UK, and he is playing a video game called Only You Can Save Mankind. And while he's playing this video game, it's a computer game, and he plays it. We go through like the first chapter talking about just how the game looks and how the goal of the game. The goal of the game is there's an invading alien species, and you have to fight against them to save mankind. And so he's trying to do that, and then he gets a message on the ship saying, "We surrender." And he thinks it's a prank, and he's like, this is weird, because he got a pirated copy from one of his friends. And so it goes through with it, and it's just like, what if the video game is not just a video game? What if these are sentient creatures inside the video game? And he decides he's going to try and help them and save them. And it follows him through this little journey of his, and we get to meet all of his friends, and all of his friends are just completely different, but have some stereotypical things. Like one of them's a hacker, one of them's just a huge nerd. You have one that's a bully, and then he meets a girl in there who becomes his friend, and it's just him dealing with, as a 12-year-old, trying to save another species. But nobody believes him. Because, like, just imagine you're playing a video game and you go up to somebody and be like, those NPCs don't like respawn. Did you know that when you kill them, they're gone forever? And people are gonna be like, what? Like, yeah, and they asked me to help them. Like, it sounds weird, but it's him doing that and going through it, and I really enjoyed it. It touched on, just like a lot of Terry Pratchett novels, especially even if they're funnier, if they're like for young adults or anything like that, they do touch on these really large themes, and this one did as well. This one touched on a few different, like, overarching, like, large themes, and it made me wanted to buy it just so I can give it to my kid and be like, read this. I need you to read this because it's good. But I gave it a 4 out of 5. It was a good book. I really enjoyed it. It was a nice palate cleanser, and it just kind of wrapped up the end of the month, and hopefully next month we'll be able to read some really good books. I'm really excited about it. I finished another Terry Pratchett novel on what's today? Today's the first today. And this will be going out tomorrow, and it was really good reading this month. I read a lot of things that, like I said, go over some really tough topics this month, and it was nice to have these little funny palate cleansers in between. And looking back on it, I think The Happy Housekeeper's Guide to Homicide was more of a palate cleanser, even though I did not care for the characters. Like, at some point, I was just like, somebody needs to just slap this person. Somebody needs to slap this person. I need somebody to just slap them. Just slap them. I'm done with them. But I still finished. And then You Can Save Mankind. Like, it brought up some interesting things. It brought up some how people react to death and react to other things, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. So that's what I read this month. What did you guys read this month? Did you guys read any books? Good books. You guys read books. Did you guys read any good books? You guys watching any good movies? You guys watching some good TV? Let me know down in the comments. It was really fun to get some of these in, and I'm really excited. I got some new books in. I got the Witcher series, and we are starting to vote on books that you guys want me to read in my Discord. If you're a part of my Discord or part of my Patreon, you get a certain amount of votes, and the voting is open for a week on what you guys want me to read out of my physical library, which was 280. No, we got 5 books yesterday. So 291 books is what I have and what I'm going through reading. We've read about 20 of them so far since we're doing this challenge of trying to read all the books we own. And you can vote on what you want me to read first. We have a lot of different types of books, and over half of them I have not read. So far, the going one is one of the Jedi Academy novels, which is really exciting. So yes, you can vote on what books you want me to read in my Discord and my Patreon. I have a whole list of all the books I have. So there's that. And thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. And don't forget to do all of the YouTube things. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. You guys are amazing and awesome, and I appreciate every single one of you. And hopefully I'll be able to talk to you guys very soon. Bye.